This is Herbaceous Plants, including annuals and perennials for Level 1 Master Gardener Training for University of Wisconsin Extension. I'm Diana Alfuth, and I'm the Horticulture Educator for Pierce County, UW Extension. And this presentation was produced by the Master Gardener General Training Committee. So first let's define what we mean by herbaceous plants. These are the plants that die back to the ground each winter here in Wisconsin, and they don't have woody stems or crowns. So there are some differences also in the arrangement of the vascular system between woody plants and herbaceous plants, but really what we're talking about are ornamental plants such as flowers, grasses, ferns that die back to the ground each winter here in Wisconsin. And we're talking about ornamental herbaceous plants as opposed to vegetables, which are also herbaceous. Sometimes, people think that ornamental plants are not as important as vegetables because we don't eat them. But ornamental plants provide many, many benefits to us emotionally and therapeutically. We all know we're really happy when we're in gardens, and looking at attractive gardens and plants makes us feel good. And there are studies that prove that to be true. And flowers and other ornamental herbaceous plants can help us reduce stress, find peace, heal better, provide physical activity, and they appeal to many of our senses through their appearance, their fragrance, their touch or texture, all of those kinds of attributes. There's also evidence that communities that have attractive gardens, container plantings, and nature spaces tend to be stronger communities. So economically, they benefit because they attract more businesses and more visitors. They tend to have lower crime rates, more community involvement from area residents. So lots of benefits to the community as a whole from herbaceous ornamental plants. So that lowly marigold can have some pretty powerful impacts, and that's why Master Gardener volunteers often become involved with community beautification projects. And while we certainly want Master Gardener volunteers to work on educational projects, we don't want to downplay the importance of the beautification projects. So when talking about herbaceous plants, there are a few other definitions that are important to understand. The first is annual. An annual plant completes its life cycle in 1 year. So it will sprout from a seed, grow up, become physiologically mature, flower, set seed, and then it dies. Now here in Wisconsin, they usually die because of frost or freeze, and then the next season we plant new ones. But even in warmer climates, an annual plant will eventually kind of peter out after it's flowered and set seed enough times. It'll kind of just fade away, die off, and have to be replaced. A biennial plant is a plant that completes its life cycle in 2 years. So it will start from seed, it'll sprout from seed, and the first year it just grows some leaves and roots. And the leaves are usually a rosette of leaves, so very low to the ground without much of a height in a stem. The second year, they will send up a flower stalk and flower, and then set seed, and then die. A perennial is one that will flower for and reproduce for several or many years. So it'll start from seed, it'll germinate, and it'll very often act similar to a biennial that first year in that it just spends its time growing some leaves, very often a rosette of leaves and root system. And then the second, or maybe it won't be until the third or fourth or subsequent year, it'll finally flower, send up flower stalk, flower, set seed, but then it will continue to do that year after year. Now there are some very short-lived perennials like cardinal flower, lobelia, that will only live a few years and then die, even though it is technically a perennial. And there are some very, very long-lived perennials like peonies tend to, once they get established and they're in a happy spot, they can live for 100 years. So there's a lot of variability as far as the age or the lifespan of the different perennials that we have. Some more important definitions will give you a hint to what a plant's flowering habits might be. The first one is grandiflora. Grandiflora means that the plant will have big flowers, big showy flowers, but not a whole lot of them on the plant. Multiflora means that it has lots of flowers, but they're going to be smaller than those on a grandiflora plant. Floribunda is somewhere in between that. And then milliflora means the plant has lots and lots and lots of tiny little flowers. Now these definitions are used in the herbaceous plants industry, and quite honestly they're kind of getting blurred because the plant breeders are doing a lot of different things to give us new and exciting plants, and so a plant's not necessarily going to fit into one of these categories, but they are terms that you will see out there. And again, when you see them, that will give you a hint about what that plant is going to look like. So if you're looking for a plant that has lots and lots and lots of little flowers, you might look for something that's labeled as a milliflora. Another thing that's important with herbaceous plants is the flower structure. And that's basically you take the individual flowers and then they're going to be arranged in a cluster or a group, and that's called an inflorescence. That's important because not only does it help you with identifying plants, but it helps you, and it's very important when you're designing either a garden or a container or what have you. Those different inflorescence shapes, those whether it's a spiky thing or like on the right there, that amaranth that's hanging down, that can all be very important in garden design. It also helps you to identify the plants because plants within a family very often have similar patterns to the flowers, the individual flowers, as well as their inflorescence, how they're arranged. And it's important to start to think about the different plant families because many plants within a family are going to have similar needs or similar pests, and if you're having a particular problem with a pest, for example, you might want to replace that plant with something else, and you probably want to avoid that same family because it might be susceptible to that pest. Here are just some pictures of a few examples of flower structure. So you can see that there's quite a bit of variability here. And again, this is just a few examples. There are many more shapes and structures that flowers come in. One of the most common flower structures that we have in our gardens is called a composite flower. The composite family is all of those plants, all of those flowers that kind of look like a daisy. So there will be all the ray petals out on the outside edge that are the bright colorful things that attract us, but they're also there to attract the pollinators. The actual flowers are in the middle and that central disc. So if you think of a sunflower, you know that that sunflower head at the end of the year has all those seeds in the middle. Each one of those seeds had its own little flower, and it might be a tiny nondescript little brown flower like you see on the right picture here, but every one of those had its own flower and flower structure. The flowers petals that we see out at the outside edge where the bright colors, that's why we grow them. But that's a composite flower. And again, we have a lot of those in our yards and gardens. They're one of the most common flower structures we have. Here are some drawings of some other common inflorescences that we have in our gardens. So the umbel shape up there in the middle is very common, and certainly the spike and the panicle are very common as well. Again, the flower structure and inflorescence can be used to help identify the plant, but it's also important when you're designing your gardens and container plantings. When you're choosing your herbaceous plants to use in your projects, you want to think about where they're best viewed from. So for example, some of the flowers that have very intricate and interesting little shapes to them need to be viewed up close. So the bleeding heart and the left side picture there, that isn't going to be appreciated if it's viewed from across a lawn. That's probably best put up near a sidewalk or a deck or a patio or something like that, where you can see those cute little flowers up close and really appreciate them. On the other hand, if you have a garden that's going to be viewed from a distance, you want to make sure that you're using something that is got either flowers or foliage that is going to have a big impact, and you're going to want to plant them probably in masses so that you have a lot to look at from a distance. So thinking about the foliage, thinking about the flowers when you're choosing your plants is extremely important. So as I mentioned earlier, knowing which family a plant is part of can be very useful not only when identifying the plant, but when choosing plants. Plants within a family often have similar appearance, especially when it comes to flower structure, but they also often have similar cultural needs, so light and moisture and those kinds of things. And they're also often susceptible to the same diseases and insects, so that's important to know which plants are closely related to each other. There's a book that's very useful in learning about plant families. It's called Botany in a Day: The Patterns Method of Plant Identification by Thomas Elpel. And this book covers each family in 1 or 2 pages. So the idea is that you would go through one family a day and learn one family a day. And eventually you'll have been exposed to all of them. It uses mostly line drawings and it shows the various shapes and patterns related to each family. So it really is a great start to getting to learn about how to identify which plants are closely related to each other. Master gardener volunteers often get involved in designing gardens and other plantings, and as I mentioned earlier, beautiful gardens and flowers can have a huge impact on individual well-being as well as on the health of entire communities. We don't have time here to get into real detailed garden design principles, but it's important to keep a few things in mind when you're designing the gardens and when you're choosing plants for those gardens. So very often we think first of the color when we're thinking about flowers or plants, but plants should be chosen not only because of they're part of a particular color scheme, but you need to consider also the plant size, its form of both the foliage as well as the flowers, the texture of the plant, and the seasonal interest, or what time of year does that plant really have particular interest that can stand out. So for example, the large coarse textured plant that's on the right picture there, the cup plant, that plant in and of itself can be a focal point because it's very large, it has that coarse texture, and it can be a good complement to a mass of finer textured plants such as the asters that are in the left picture. You want to make sure you have something providing interest all season long and even into winter. In winter around here, some of these plants can be left up, left standing, and those seed heads catch the snow, give us something to look at. They can even provide seeds for wildlife. So coneflowers, for example, can very often be providing food for finches in the middle of winter when there's 2 feet of snow out there. Also, when you're choosing your plants and designing your garden, be sure that you think about the users or the main viewers of the garden space and choose your plants appropriately. So, for example, if you're doing a project that's a garden at a nursing home, the residents there might especially enjoy the old-fashioned type of flowers that will remind them of the flowers that they used to grow in their gardens. Ideally, you're going to plan your garden out ahead of time on paper so that you're sure that you get everything spaced correctly, that you combine the colors and forms and textures well. Remember, it's a whole lot easier to move a plant with an eraser on paper than it is with a shovel in the garden. Eye movement in garden design is another thing that's really important. We want to move the eye peacefully through the landscape. So we want the eye to get in the landscape, move back and forth in a nice, quiet, relaxed, peaceful manner. And we want to keep the eye in the landscape. We don't want to take it up to the blue sky or off to the neighbors or the freeway in the distance or anything like that. So we want to direct the eye where we want it to go. You want to avoid planting only one of everything because if there's one of these, one of those, one of those, one of those, that makes for a real busy landscape. And usually the eye then just bounces around, doesn't know where to go. The human eye likes direction, likes to know where to go, at least some kind of direction. So you want to use masses or groups of plants that create some lines that move the eye, and use single plants only when you want them to stand out as a focal point. Eye movement can be used to draw attention to something important that you might not otherwise notice. So, for example, a smaller piece of garden art or the entrance to a path. Very often, where the eye goes, the feet follow. So, careful garden design can do a lot to direct people and draw attention to the things that we want them to see.